not meant for the Sabbath. Right? You see the context in which you would use it? Someone who's being too rigid, too formal. Right? Relax. Take it easy. To forgive is better. Right? It's, you know, it's really something that we can take a lesson from ourselves as Muslims, especially in light of all of the diversity in the Sharia. Right? And sometimes we make judgments about other Muslims about things where there's permissibility, there's leeway.
Oh, how dare you!
Okay, so is that clear?
Yeah, it's too low, man. I couldn't do the limbo.
So the next one I want to go to here is Mark 3:34.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
These verses that you're mentioning, I'm looking at the Codex, and it says exactly what every other Bible is supposed to say. What is so significant about the Codex?
Which Codex Sinaiticus?
Yeah.
Well, these verses are the same, yeah. These verses I'm quoting are for a different reason.
Oh. Codex
Sinaiticus was when we looked at Mark 1:1, and when we get to the end of Mark, the ending of Mark is very different in the Codex Sinaiticus. But these verses I'm sort of trying to give you a general familiarity with what Mark is actually saying, what is the content of the Gospel of Mark. So this is an interesting one here, is that Jesus says here that he looked around and he said, behold, so people come to him and say, your mother and your brothers are waiting outside. He says, who are my mothers and brothers? Whoever does the will of God, this is my brother and my sister and my mother. Right? Remember I said that in Mark there's a tinge of Nasibi, sort of anti-Ahlul Bayt of Isa alayhi salam. That's sort of one way of looking at this verse, is that there's probably a conflict at the time between the Judaizers or Semitic Christians and the Hellenistic Christians. Because remember, the authority of the Semitic strand of Christianity was firmly vested with James, who's in Jerusalem, the brother of Jesus. Right? So it almost seems like this verse is a polemic against the family of Isa. Like, who is my mother? Like, mother is Maryam, alayhi salam. She has high status, yani. James is his brother, who is the first Khalifa of Isa alayhi salam. So I think the purpose here from Mark, who's representing the Semitic strain of Christianity, is to sort of downplay the importance of the Semitic line, or the family of Isa alayhi salam, who were invested. We sort of see some of this with Islamic history, and the Bani Umayyah and their struggles against Ahlul Bayt and their clashes and things like that. It's very interesting. What's interesting also here, he says the Greek word here for will is thelema, to theu, thelema. This looks like this. And have you guys heard of this movement, thelema? You ever heard of that? So this is a very popular movement amongst people in the West. Basically, it's Satanism, and it comes from this Greek word based on this verse. Right? It's called thelema. So there was an Englishman named Aleister Crowley who started the Church of Satan, and he had a couple of books that he wrote. One is called Magic in Theory and Practice. And in this book, very clearly, he says that one of the ways in which to get demonic power is to kill children. Very interesting. He had another book which is more popular called Liber Legis. Again, his name is Crowley. You can look this up. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is real stuff. Liber Legis. Who knows what that means? No Latin speakers? Book of the law. Lex is the genitive. The book of the law. Lex. Right? Like Lex Luthor. You know what that means, Lex Luthor? The law of Martin Luther. But it's Luthor, so sort of hide the anti-Christian undertone. It's the founders of, the inventors of, what do you say, the inventors of Superman? Or what, Schuster and the creators, right? They were two Jewish men. So the arch nemesis is Lex Luthor, right? Of course, Martin Luther was vehemently anti-Jewish. He hated the Jews and used to actually call for the violence against Jews. And then you have his father, whose name is Jor-El, which is a Hebrew name, and then Kal-El, which is another Superman's name, which is a Hebrew name. And God sending His Son, which again is Messianism. It's Christian also, but it also has roots in Judaism. Anyway, that was just something interesting to throw in there. Only I think about these things. Sometimes I think that. Is anyone else thinking about this? Anyway, so in this book here, Liber Legis, by Aleister Crowley, who started the Church of Satan, and this movement called Thelema, they're called Thelemites. His golden law, I guess you could say, is do what thou wilt. This is the whole of the law. Do what thou wilt. So this is the article of faith that these people live by.
When was this?
He was in the early 20th century. So there's a musician called Jay-Z who has a sweater, and quite often he wears it. Do what thou wilt, is what Aleister Crowley, a man who advocates the killing of children, said. Right, so these people are enemies. There's something wrong with these people. So do what thou wilt, right? What does that mean? So like someone like Marilyn Manson, who is an open Satanist, right? He says, they ask him, how do you worship Satan? He says, we don't have an effigy, we don't like make dua, put our hands up, although some people actually do that. He says, we just do what we want. That's how we worship Satan. You say, how? I say, well, we live a life of what? Disobedience to God, right? وَلَا تَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا. This is a verse in the Quran. Marahan means exactly that. To walk the earth without accountability. To do whatever you want to do. Right? Do what thou wilt.
Why would someone do that?
Because that's what they want to do. It's a rebellion against God. They say, some of them say, they say, follow your heart. That's what it means. Just follow your heart. As long as you don't hurt anybody. But the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is such that if you don't follow His commandments, you are hurting people. If you say, I'm just going to get high or get drunk, I'm not going to hurt anyone, then you get in your car and you kill somebody, well, then you're hurting people, aren't you? And there's many examples of that. So the only one that can truly say, I do what I will, is who? Wallahu yaf'alu ma yurid. Allah is the only one who does what He wills. So when they say, we do what we want, they're imitating Satan in the fact that he says, Ana khayru minhu. I am better than him. I, putting myself. Nafs first. Nafsi, nafsi. Okay? This is a very big movement. The Thelemites. Huh?
It's still active.
Very active. Very popular. Especially amongst amongst like Hollywood elite and things like that.
It started in the Bay Area, right?
There's a lot of, there's people talk about the Illuminati and things like that. I don't really get into that stuff, but, it's thought-provoking. There's a lot of hand gestures that people make, celebrities make. They wear these things on their shirts and people don't know what they mean. And a lot of it is just Satanism and has symbolic, and has roots in Crowley's. If you read his book, he does ajib and gharib types of things to get power from demons and things like that.
He literally says in his book that you kill kids.
Yeah, he says it's better to kill male children. Some people say, for example, at a halftime show, right? You have Beyonce making the Masonic triangle, and then you have a 33-minute power outage, 33 degrees of the Freemason Lodge. There's people who get into this stuff like really at a deep level, but if you concentrate on these things too much, we become cynical, and it's just a waste of time. But these things are out there. It's not fake. It's real stuff. Magic is real. Satan is real. So it comes from this Greek word, thelema, which means will, but the will of God, right? Anyway. There's a book I'm reading right now called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Very famous book by a Brazilian theologian, or Brazilian activist and scholar. His name is Freire, who says that one of the things the oppressor does to keep people at bay and to keep them in a state of non-thinking is to give them bread and circus, like the Romans used to give people. Bread and circus, food and entertainment, which is the Super Bowl, right? Here's a bunch of food, get drunk, watch this big game, and entertain yourselves, or, fast food and pornography. Bread and circus. These things keep people busy. They stop thinking. And all of these things are happening and they don't even notice.
This word, Salema, does it have any relation to Suleiman alayhi salam?
No, it doesn't have any
Because
relation.
it's magic or something?
No.
No?
No, this is actually a good word. Salema means like irada. That's how you would translate that in Arabic. Irada. Iradatullah. Salema to fail, the will of God. Right? So they take this word, which has a good connotation in the New Testament, and Crowley uses it in the sense of do what you want. Right? Don't worry about what God says. So open rebellion against God. So you see them wearing it on their shirts all the time. Jay-Z wears it all the time. Of course, he's married to the girl that did the halftime show.
The word library religious, you said it's library of what? It's laws? Library of laws?
Liber Legis, the book of the law.
The book of the law.
The book of the law. Yeah.
Which is Crowley's book?
Crowley's book, yeah.
That's what it's called? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, do some research on it. It's really interesting. Very interesting. It's really big in America, by the way. Very, very big. The Thelemites.
Is it legal?
Yeah, it's legal. Yeah, they're not breaking any law. Yeah. As long as they don't institute human sacrifice. And Yani, Allahu Alam what they do on Halloween. You know, kids go missing and things like that.
Yeah.
This stuff really happens. Just the other day, a 10-month-old baby, right, was kidnapped and killed and thrown in a field for what? What was happening? And you notice these things happen around October, November, December. You have a lot of child abductions and murder of children. People do these things. Where can we go next? This is a good one here. So this is Mark 10, 17 to 22. It's still there. Mark 10, 17 to 22.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Yeah, so this is about the rich man. So, this is an interesting story. This pericope, a rich man comes to Isa alayhi salam, and he says, "Good master, how do I go to heaven?" He says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except one, that is God." It's a very clear denial of deity by Isa alayhi salam. And again, if you look at the construction in the Greek, there's a maf'ul muqaddam for stress. Why me are you calling good? No one good except one, that is God. What's interesting here is that the part where it says no one is where it says no one except one, that is God, is not in Matthew. So Matthew says, "Why are you calling me good? No one is good." He doesn't say except one, that is God. Matthew didn't include that part.
Isn't this a very strong foundation for the theology perspective for Mark?
It is, yeah. This is usually what opponents of Trinitarian theology will quote. Mark 10:18. This is Mark 10:18. And then he says to him, which is really interesting, if you ask any Christian today, basically, find a Christian at random and say, ask the same question this man asked Jesus. What was his question? He says, "Ti poeso hina zo'ein ionion." What do I do to go to heaven? This is what he says. What do you think a Christian today would say?
Please, Jesus died on the cross for your sins, brother.
Jesus died for your sins, and he was resurrected from the dead, and he's sitting at the right hand of the Father. This is what you have to believe and go to heaven. Is this what Jesus said?
No.
Listen to what he says. He says, "Tas entolas oidas." You know the Sharia. You know the commandments. Don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, honor your mother and your father, so on and so forth. And he says, I've done all of these. And Jesus looked at him, and it says he loved him. This is also missing in Matthew. Remember what Matthew does with Mark. Matthew will redact Mark, and I have more examples of this. We'll talk about it next time when we actually focus on Matthew. What does Matthew's edits to Mark's gospel are very interesting. Matthew did not like that Jesus loved a Jew before believing in him. Right? It says, I've kept all of the commandments. It says Jesus loved him for that. That made him love him. Right? Matthew said, no, that's too early. Let's see what he does first. Is he going to follow him or not? Right? So then he says, go sell all that you own and follow me. And the man said, I can't, I'm rich. And then he went away with a heavy heart. Right? So he couldn't be a disciple. That doesn't mean he's a disbeliever. That means he just can't be my disciple. Right? He probably believed in Isa alayhi salam. So this is, it's a spiritual path.
Why didn't you say take up the cross?
Yeah, so this is
Not that, yeah.
probably an allegory he's using, because the Jews at the time were being crucified by Roman authorities left and right. So take up the cross, meaning you have to struggle under threat of death. Yeah, it could mean like,
Be ready to die.
obviously, the Gospel of Mark endorses the crucifixion. There's no doubt about that.
They're not saying it's a foreshadowing he's going to die on the cross.
Maybe it is. It probably is. Because remember, the heart of the Gospel is the crucifixion. That's why the Gospel is in the New Testament. It's an extended Passion narrative. But we have to look at the differences in the Passion narrative, which are really interesting. Yes?
There are so many contradictions, which actually tell you that, for example, the verse number 18, why you call me good, no one is good except one God. With these beings in the New Testament itself,
Yes.
don't the Christians read the Bible as much as we read the Quran? Right?
Yeah.
At least so people don't think, or it's just that
Yeah. You know what Christians say about this? The Christian scholars who believe in the Trinity, they say Jesus here is asking a rhetorical question. So he's basically saying something like, why are you calling me God? Do you think I'm God? Like, do you know? Like that. That's how they kind of take they take the verse. Right? So yeah, there's answers for everything. But the construction is, why me are you calling? He's almost offended by that. Right? The Greek is very powerful that you don't get in the translation.
I was talking to a Christian guy at my work, and he was telling that they believed in all these things, but he said after crucifixion, all these things were null and void, and he doesn't have to do anything else now.
Yeah, so that's
so they know they read, but they think that it's an old version before he sacrificed.
So when we get to Paul's letters, Paul's Christology is basically exactly that, is what does the crucifixion mean? Because it's very foreign for the Jew. The Jew is like, he's not the Messiah, he was killed. He's obviously not the Messiah, right? And then Paul says, no, he was. And they say, what are you talking about? Well, you see, he had to die for your sins. And they're like, but that's completely against what the Old Testament says. But you see, God changed his mind. Right? So God doesn't change. No, this is God's new plan, his new covenant. So it just, for the Jew, it was a stumbling block, as Paul says. Right? This idea that God can come down in human form by itself is total sacrilege, according to Jewish theology. It's very clear, God is not a man. It says it very clearly in two places in the Hebrew Bible. God is not a man. Right?
So, our belief is that, Hazrat Isa came and reformed the Jews, and eventually Hazrat Muhammad came and reformed. But the true believers at that time were the followers of Jesus, Hazrat Isa. So who were they? If it wasn't Paul and these people, then who were they?
Who were the true Christians?
Yeah.
They were Unitarian Christians, but they were so marginalized because of the power dynamics of their era. But they were around, but they were a minority that was being marginalized by Trinitarian authorities. There is obviously a lot of truth in Semitic Christianity, in Hellenistic Christianity. Many of our ulama, they quote from the New Testament. Right? Imam Ghazali quotes from the New Testament. Modern day scholars quote from the New Testament. So whatever doesn't contradict our aqidah, we can say, Allahu Alam, it might be a valid part of. You can use it for nasiha. It's like a weak hadith, right? Basically, the entire New Testament is like hadith. All of it is weak. But so they'll use it in that way. But who are the actual Christians? They've been marginalized by this time, even by the 4th century. The authorities in Rome are Trinitarian Christians. So even amongst the Trinitarian Christians, there's massive difference of opinion. But forget about the Ebionite outside the door. He's not going to get past the hallway. Even in the ballroom where people are arguing, those are all people who believe that Jesus is in some way divine. But they even within that theology, they have massive difference of opinion. Like Surah Al-Bayyinah, لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة. Who is al-Bayyinah? The exegetes say the Prophet ﷺ. The Ahl al-Kitab and Mushrikeen are not going to break away from their kufr until al-Bayyinah comes. Rasulun min Allah. The indefinite article. Not Rasulullah. Yatlu suhufan mutahara. Rasulun min Allah. Meaning unrestricted. It's nakira. Meaning a great messenger. An exalted messenger from God. وَمَا تَفَرَّقَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ. And then, what is the rest of the verse? جاءتهم البينة. Again, al-Bayyinah. Who is al-Bayyinah now? The Mushrikeen are not mentioned. This is Isa alayhi salam, according to the exegetes. That Isa alayhi salam, he caused the Ahl al-Kitab to have a lot of difference of opinion because they couldn't agree about who they were, about who he was, because they didn't stick to his teaching, they didn't follow the Sharia. And some of his so-called disciples went into places they shouldn't have gone. Right?
But this strand we don't know much about. I mean, what the true Christians would be. Right?
Yeah, some scholars surmise that many of the Ebionites fleeing from Roman persecution came down into the Hijaz, and that's how they explain the Christology of the Quran. This is why the Quran, for example, denies the sonship of Christ and his divinity, because the Prophet ﷺ was influenced by Ebionite elements. But there really is no evidence for it. There are no Christian tribes living in Mecca at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a Christian here and there. Waraka bin Nawfal is a Christian.
Was he Ebionite? Or we don't know that?
We don't know his Christology. Probably not. But certainly there were no Christian tribes. There were no Jewish tribes living in Mecca either. In Yathrib, yeah, there's Jewish tribes in north in the Khaybar. If you go out a little bit more, you'll find Christian tribes. Bani Hanifa was a Christian tribe, but not in Mecca. Right? And it's interesting, the dominant opinion is that the Ebionites did not believe in the virgin birth, but the Quran confirms it in 2 places. Anyway, any more questions? I just want to show you one more verse, inshallah. This is 11:12, chapter 11, verses 12 to 14. Now this is very interesting, very troubling for Trinitarian Christians. The cursing of the fig tree. So the next day, he went out from Bethany, and he was hungry. And he saw a sukain, which is a fig tree, from a distance. Right? And there's a lot of figs and olives in Palestine. So Ibn Abbas says, Watini was zaytun. Teen, fig, is a reference to Jabal Judi, where the Ark of Noah docked. Zaytun, fig, is a reference to Jerusalem. The olive, right, the Mount of Olives is right next to the temple where Ibrahim lived. Turi Sinin, Musa alayhi salam, Hadal Balad al-Amin, Mecca. So Allah is taking an oath, a qasam, by all 4 of these things. And Ibn Abbas says, by the sharia of all 4 of these things. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. That the insan, and some say this is the Prophet ﷺ, is the best mold. Right? In other words, these 4 scriptures bear witness to the greatness of the Prophet ﷺ. That's how some of the exegetes. Anyway, so Jesus comes to this fig tree, and he sees it from afar, so he goes to it to find fruit. He doesn't find anything. So then he curses it, for the time of fruit was not yet. So you see the problem here from a theological standpoint? That Isa alayhi salam was supposed to be God, and of course we have qualitative attributes of God. The Christians have these, as-sifatul ma'ani. What are the qualitative attributes of God? There's 7 of them. In Islam there's ilm, and this is ilm mutlaq, like omniscience, right? That means all-knowing, qudra, omnipotence, all-powerful, irada, divine will, basar and sama', kalam, and haya. So God has hearing and seeing, not like we hear and see. Speaking ability, not like we speak. And life. God cannot die. So the fact that Isa alayhi salam does not know something, seeing a fig tree from afar, thinking there's fruit, and then seeing that it's out of season, it's not the right season, demonstrates that he doesn't know something. There's a naqs, there's a deficiency in intellect, or in aql, or in knowledge. So he's disqualified as being God. Yes?
There was a part in Mark where the woman who has I guess the hemorrhaging problem, she grabs his clothes.
Yeah.
And then he says, wait, who pulled my cloak? And he's like, turning around to look. And when I read it, I mean, it seemed pretty obvious that he had no idea who pulled his cloak, and he was looking around. That seemed like it almost meant like he didn't know something too. Yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah, that's also troubling. So he's talking about a parable or pericope where a woman who's been hemorrhaging for years and years, she has istihada. She touches the thobe of Isa alayhi salam, and then she immediately becomes healed. And then he turns around and says, "Who was that?" And then he says, "I felt some power leave me." Right? This again is very troubling. He doesn't know who did it, and then he apparently has a power supply of some sort. Right? Very troubling. Isa alayhi salam, the Christian will say about this here, they say, look, he's still a man, right? But the problem here is, because according to the Council of Chalcedon, he's 100% God and 100% man at the same time. Yes, he's a man in the sense that he has to eat and drink and do these types of things. But when it comes to qualitative attributes like knowledge, his knowledge has to be perfect. The Christian sort of speaks out of the other side of his mouth. Because in other times he'll say, Jesus knew what people were thinking because he's God. Right?
Yeah.
But then here he says, oh, he's just a man.
And there's verses there that indicate that.
But he doesn't know something. Right? So that's what qualitative attribute means. It means this is the quality of God. God has this quality of all knowledge. If a person claiming to be God does not have this quality, he's disqualified. He cannot be God. That's what that means. Right? The fact, let's just say, for instance, we entertain the Christian. Okay, we'll humor you for now. He's God. Astaghfirullah. So he created this fig tree. Certainly he knows everything about the fig tree. The fact that, first of all, he sees the fig tree from a distance and makes an error in judgment thinking that there's figs. And then he approaches the fig tree that he created and he knows everything about. And he discovers, oh, it's the wrong season. And then he becomes angry and curses the fig tree for doing something that he commanded it to do in a certain season. So it's just very, very problematic for Christians.
But isn't it troubling that, a prophet or a messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would actually curse a tree for not bearing food in unseasonal time?
I don't think it's problematic. It does show impetuousness, but that would be considered impatience. Al-a'rad al-bashariya. They say Musa alayhi salam had a short temper. So that doesn't, it's yajuz, it's mumkin, it's conceivable for a prophet to have that issue, yeah. Although, it's kind of, it would be considered like a sin in the rank and the maqam of a prophet. A sin in the maqam of a prophet is a good act, according to us, or a mundane act, but to a prophet it's a sin. What was I going to say? And some of the Christians say this is a parable, it didn't actually happen. The cursing of the fig tree is a parable for Israel, and Jesus is cursing Israel. And that opens up another bag of goodies. So some Christians, say it's both. So there's a zahir and there's a batin meaning. There's an apparent and a non-apparent, or exoteric and esoteric meaning. The exoteric meaning is, yes, this in fact did happen. Jesus approached a fig tree. He saw it was out of season. He cursed it. But what that means is he's cursing Israel because they're disbelieving in him. And so the tree is done. Yeah?
Remember in our Aqidah class how we went over definition, the so-called definition of who Allah is?
Yes.
ذاته واجب الوجود متعالي
المستحق لجميع الكمالات
الكمالات والمتعالي على كل صفات النقص.
والمتنزه والمتعال.
طيب, so what is their definition of who God is? Just so we can have something to, you see what I'm saying? So if we say for 1 second He's all-knowing and all of a sudden He's not knowing, He's human, He's 100%. So what's their definition? So we can know what's their definition, so we can know when to say that, hey, look, you guys define it like this, and now you guys are saying
We'll get to, well, that's in their creed. We'll get to it. Because every person in the Trinity has a different definition. Every person in the creed. But the thing is, it still doesn't make sense because they say, oh, the Father is omnipotent and all-knowing. Right? And Isa alayhi salam, here they say he doesn't know because he's still a man. But he shares an essence with the Father, which necessitates him to know as well. And they say, oh, it's ultimately a mystery.
So they don't have a...
It's a big...
We're going to get into it, or it's just blah, blah, blah?
It's a big conundrum.
Okay.
No one can explain it. I mean, you can't explain God's nature anyway, but at least it should make some sort of rational sense.
Consistency.
Yeah, consistency, exactly.
Okay.
There's actually, we'll finish with this, there's a verse in Matthew we'll look at as well. Matthew 24:36, where Jesus says, of that day nobody knows, meaning the day of judgment. Of that day nobody knows. Not the angels, nor the Son, but only the Father. Right? There's some manuscripts of Matthew where that verse, nor the Son, has been removed from the Gospel because Christian scribes copying it down said, oh my God, Jesus doesn't know the day of judgment. He's not God. Right? Let's move this out of the Gospel.
So sometimes when I read here, capital S, that's referring to Jesus alayhi salam?
Yeah. So again, this is important that we understand the context. So the Son of God, right? In a Hellenistic world, right, Greco-Roman world, this is a divine person. This is the Roman emperor. Like it says, Kaiser Augustus, what does it say? Filius Dei, on an ancient Roman coin that was minted at the time of Caesar Augustus. To Caesar Augustus, the Son of God. Right? Filius Dei, the Son of God. And then it says, Pater Patriae, Father of the country. He's Son and Father at the same time. Right? So, the expression Lord and Savior is taken straight out of the emperor cult. Lord and Savior. Kurios Kai Soto. That's exactly what they call the Roman emperor. But this phrase in a Semitic Jewish context means a pious Jew. Okay? If you read the Old Testament, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. To David, you are my son, this day I have begotten you. Right? To Moses, he says, you will be as God unto Pharaoh, and Aaron as your prophet. You're like God. He calls him, you're Elohim. You're God. Right? Not literally. In the Psalm 86, it says, you are gods, all sons of the Most High. I mean, you are not gods as in a big G, but divine, not deity, you're divine. You're God-like. You're holy people. You're sacrosanct people. That's what it means. So when you say the Son of God, so there's sons of God mentioned in the Old Testament, but the Son of God in a Jewish context means the Messiah. That's a messianic title. Okay? Just like when we say, let's say there's a group of prophets here from different people. And then we say, where is the prophet? Who are you talking about? You're talking about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But even though they're prophets, right? There are other prophets. But you know, everyone knows, if you say, where is the prophet? You're talking about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you have sons of God. You have awliya. The Jews have a concept of awliya, righteous people. They're called saddiqim, righteous people. And then you have the Son of God, who is the Messiah. There's a definite article. That's what it means. It's a messianic title. But this Jewish concept was Hellenized by Christians that were evangelized by Paul into paganism, basically.
Two quick questions. One last time we went over Hellenistic Christianity, but we didn't really go over Semitic Christianity. James, Jesus, brother, right?
Yeah,
we're
we're
going to
good.
get into that.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
that's a big one.
Okay. And another one. What from Mark should we really memorize for our dawah?
The verses we go
Just
over.
these ones right here?
Yeah, and anything else that you read, anything else that you really have a question about, you should bring it up in class.
Okay.
Okay.
Is your book cover this, the Defense of Islam?
Sometimes.
Like some of these in Mark's, and not in this order, of course, because
Yeah, a little bit. I don't think it goes specifically into Gospels, but
yeah, that's
more of refutation.
okay.
Sometimes. Yes?
Regarding the codex that we just learned, in the last class you had mentioned about the Q documents. Do they have any relationship with each other? They are quite separate documents.
Well, the Codex Sinaiticus is a 4th century document. So yeah, I mean, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are included in the Codex Sinaiticus, and their source was Q. Luke and Matthew's source is Q. But Q was written very early, around 40 or 50. That's what's so great about Q source document, is that it's not tainted by Paul's Christology. It's written concurrently with Paul. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are influenced by Paul. That's why the passion, the cross, is so central. Whereas Q, there's no trace of any passion narrative. We'll get to more to Q when we look at Matthew and Luke. There's a question over here on the right.
There was a part in Mark in which they were talking about Herod, and they said, it seemed like at first they were saying like Herodias, I think, or Herodias was like his wife, and then like in the next line it said it was his daughter. Is there like a reference in there? It seemed like it was,
Oh, Herod.
yeah, Herod. At first it said that like Herodias or whatever, like I forgot the name.
Salome? Her name is Salome.
And the one I was reading it said Herodias.
What verse is that?
I think it was in Mark 7 or Mark 6, I forgot. But it said like, but it said Herodias, and it said, it's when they talk about when John the Baptist was killed.
Yeah.
And it said something like, Jesus said like